Welcome back.
Of living in the United States, a place where opportunities seemed limitless. After years of studying hard in Egypt and obtaining a student visa, he finally made his way to the US with his girlfriend, Elizabeth, by his side. Elizabeth, who had always been supportive of Sami's dreams, was excited to start a new chapter of their lives together. They had both worked tirelessly to secure their visas, and now they were ready to build a future. However, the dream quickly hit a roadblock. As the weeks passed, it became clear that Sami's student visa would soon expire. Despite his efforts, the path to a permanent stay in the US wasn't as simple as he'd hoped. In fact, it was becoming increasingly difficult. He needed to find a way to stay fast. That's when his cousin, Lisa, came into the picture. Lisa had been living in the US for several years. She was Aisha's best friend from Egypt and had become Sami's trusted ally. Knowing Sami's situation, she reached out to him with an idea, one that was controversial, but potentially his only way forward. "Why don't you marry someone here to get your green card?" Lisa suggested during a late-night phone call. "I know it sounds drastic, but it's the quickest way to stay in the country. I can help you find someone who will do this for you." Sami felt a lump form in his throat. A marriage of convenience. It seemed like the only solution, but it was also risky and morally complicated. His relationship with Elizabeth was real, but marrying someone else would be crossing a line. Elizabeth, always understanding but never naive, was aware of the situation from the beginning. She knew that Sami's visa situation was precarious, and they had discussed the option of marriage before, though neither of them had taken it seriously. Now, with Lisa's offer, the idea was becoming all too real. "You need to do what you need to do," Elizabeth said, her voice calm but tinged with uncertainty. "But if you're going to marry someone else, we need to be honest with each other about it." Sami felt the weight of her words. He knew that this would strain their relationship, but his dreams of staying in the US seemed to outweigh everything else at the moment. After some tense discussions, Sami reluctantly agreed to marry someone for a green card, someone who wasn't Elizabeth. He didn't want to risk jeopardizing his relationship with her, and he knew this had to remain strictly business. Lisa didn't waste time. She quickly connected Sami with her friend, another woman from Egypt living in the US, who was open to the idea of a fake marriage for the right price. Her name was Layla, and she had her own reasons for agreeing to the arrangement. Layla wasn't looking for love, just a way to make some money and help Sami secure his green card. It was a transactional relationship, nothing more. With Elizabeth's reluctant blessing, Sami met with Layla. They agreed on the terms. Sami would marry her, stay legally married for a couple of years, and then file for divorce once his green card came through. It was clear from the start that emotions wouldn't play a part in this arrangement. This was about paperwork and survival. The wedding was small and simple, an official ceremony at the courthouse with just a handful of people in attendance, including Lisa and a few mutual friends. Elizabeth didn't come. The gap between them felt vast, and even though she said she understood, it was hard to shake the feeling that something had broken between them. Once the papers were signed and the wedding was over, Sami and Layla moved into a shared apartment. On the surface, they kept things professional, avoiding any unnecessary emotional connection. Layla worked as a waitress, while Sami continued his studies at a local university. They didn't spend much time together, except when they had to practice their story for immigration interviews. They kept their interactions minimal, nothing more than a couple of roommates with a shared goal. And warmth began to slip into the role of a wife with surprising ease. At social events, she'd introduce Sami as her husband with an affectionate smile, something that made him uncomfortable, but also made it hard to ignore the way her presence was starting to affect him. He had expected it to be easy, just a legal formality. But as Layla cooked meals for him, remembered his preferences, and left him small notes, something unexpected began to happen. He started to notice how she laughed at his jokes, how she cared for him in little ways, as if she were his real wife. He reminded himself repeatedly that this was just part of the act, but it didn't stop the unease creeping in. Sami's life became a careful balancing act. He still loved Elizabeth, but his connection with Layla was starting to feel more genuine than he had ever anticipated. The small gestures that once seemed like part of the act now felt like real moments of kindness. One evening, as they sat together in their apartment after a long day, Layla turned to him and said, "Sami, I'm not doing this because I expect anything from you. I know this is for your green card, but I care about you. Don't worry, I won't make this harder than it needs to be." Sami stared at her, unsure of how to respond. He wanted to be honest, to tell her that his heart was with Elizabeth, but there was a part of him that found comfort in the warmth Layla had brought into his life. The line between what was real and what was fake was blurring. The first major test of their arrangement came with the immigration interview. Sami and Layla had prepared meticulously for this moment. They rehearsed their story, made sure their answers matched, and ensured they knew every detail about each other's life, even though their marriage had been a legal formality from the start. The officer at the immigration office was thorough, asking questions about their relationship, their daily routines, and how they met. Layla answered confidently, giving them the perfect couple image. But then the officer asked a question Sami wasn't prepared for. "And when did you two realize this was the right decision? When did you know this was the one?" Sami froze. His heart raced. He hadn't practiced for this. Layla, ever the pro, squeezed his hand under the table and smiled at the officer. "Oh, Sami's not great with emotions, but I knew he was the one when he drove an hour to surprise me with my favorite flowers after a rough week. He's a little shy, but he shows how much he cares in his own way." Sami blinked, caught off guard. That had never happened, but the way she looked at him made him forget it was a lie. The officer seemed satisfied with their answers and handed them the approval for the green card. With the green card officially in hand, things should have settled down. But the more time Sami spent with Layla, the more complicated his feelings became. He felt like he was walking a tightrope, trying to keep his emotions in check while dealing with the guilt of his arrangement with her. She had always known about the arrangement, but she was beginning to feel a strain in her relationship with Sami. Despite her initial understanding, there were times when she couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. Sami was legally married to someone else, even if it was just for paperwork. One evening, after a particularly awkward dinner with Elizabeth, Sami found himself standing in the apartment he shared with Layla. The place no longer felt like just a temporary situation. It felt like a home he hadn't expected to feel connected to. "Sami, what's really going on?" Layla asked one night, her voice soft. "You're not here because you want to be. I can see it. And I don't want to be part of something that's not real." He had come to care for Layla in ways he never intended, but he knew where his heart truly belonged. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't expect this to happen. I didn't expect to fall for you." Layla nodded, understanding more than he realized. "It's okay. You need to figure out what you really want. For your future, for your heart." As Sami sat in the silence of the apartment, he realized that his journey for a green card had led him down a much more complicated path than he had ever anticipated. It wasn't just about papers, it was about love, loyalty, and the sacrifices we make for the people we care about. The future was unclear, but he married Layla and they changed their love story from fake marriage to real marriage.